Okay, welcome. Welcome. Thank you all for being here today. Good afternoon. I'm Robin Koval. I'm the president and CEO of Truth Initiative, and it's wonderful to welcome you here to the Warner series at the lovely museum. In addition to those of you who are here joining us in Washington, we also have an online audience drawn from communities across the U.S. who share an interest with us in learning about the ways we can make tobacco and its enormous negative health consequences a thing of the past. Before we get started, I do want to recognize a few people in the audience. Shekinah Singletary from Trinity Health, our partner and sponsor of our Reinvent the Real grant program, is here, along with a contingent of student activists and their adult leaders. Raise your hands so we can recognize you. Thank you so much for being here. For those of you who don't know, Reinvent the Real is working to educate young people on the issue of smoking in the movies and urging them to advocate for the MPAA, the ratings folks, for an R rating on movies that portray smoking. So thank you so much for your work and for being here today. It's an issue we care about a lot. One of our key policy priorities, the Truth Initiative, is working to address the influence of tobacco in pop culture. That influence comes in multiple forms, including gaming, the fashion world, movies, and our most recent focus, which is in streaming video content. So, here's kind of the conundrum. While smoking becomes ever more unacceptable and marginalized in, quote, real life, smoking imagery continues to be portrayed positively and extensively in media and pop culture. And it's kind of confusing and a dangerous contradiction, we think, for young people who take their cues from pop culture and celebrity influencers and are especially vulnerable to believe that smoking is more popular than it really is. That perception of popularity, of course, serves the increasingly, I like to say, desperate needs of the tobacco industry, who need 1,300 replacement smokers, their words, to take the place of those who die from a tobacco-related disease every day. Now, of course, traditional cigarette advertising hasn't been permitted on broadcast television in the U.S. since 1971. Joe Camel is gone, the Marlboro Man is gone. But nevertheless, while everybody was watching, kind of nobody was paying attention, and what we've experienced is this pervasive re-emergence of smoking imagery and other content that risks glamorization and renormalization of a deadly habit to a new generation of young people. And, as the Surgeon General has stated, the evidence proves that higher exposure to smoking imagery makes youth twice as likely to smoke. So, for example, 44% of adolescents that begin smoking do so because of smoking imagery in the movies. We've all heard that a lot. And that same relationship would just seem naturally to hold true for other forms of content as well, especially ones that are highly immersive. In 2015, we released our Played report, which found that tobacco was present in many video games, including those rated appropriate for teens. That further underscores our concern, the fact that 56% of teens play games on any given day. We're going to hear a lot more about that during our talk. Our report demonstrated that tobacco use is widespread and portrayed positively in this medium, but tobacco warnings, not so much. So we continue to track major video game releases and update that report annually. And then more recently, in March, we released our While You Were Streaming report that reveals that 79% of the shows most popular with young people between the ages of 15 to 24 depict tobacco use. Here's a brief video that will give you just an idea of how pervasive that is.
Come to Marlboro country.
Good like a cigarette.
really smoke?
I love it so very much.
That sucks.
I need a cigarette.
Can I get one of those?
Give me one of those, will you?
Dentists recommend them. Makes your food taste even better.
Remind her not to smoke it.
Don't smoke it, darling. You just have to hold it.
Really don't mind if you keep me sweating. I really don't mind if you blow me away. I'm trying to keep cool, but the way we're going, you're making me melt in your hot, hot flames.
Who got a cigarette there? Anyone got a cigarette at the bar?
So, as you see, tobacco is making a rather unwelcome comeback with shows that are really popular among young people. Stranger Things, The Walking Dead, Orange is the New Black, those are at the top of the list of offenders, and of course, there are many, many more. All facets of our entertainment culture, from television and movies to video games to fashion, are playing a role in continuing to make smoking seem normal, or worse, glamorous, rebellious, edgy, or as one young person told us in some of our interviews, badass. That's not good. So while we've made incredible progress in ending the tobacco epidemic in our country, those gains, we believe, are at risk, especially as smoking imagery grows in popularity in newer digital content. And that's what our discussion today will focus on. Our moderator for today's Warner series is Travis Andrews, a pop culture reporter from the Washington Post, where he covers music, movies, TV, comedy, celebrity culture. Prior to joining the Post, Travis was a travel and culture editor from Southern Living magazine and also a contributing pop culture reporter for Mashable and The Week and a contributing editor for the sci-fi blog Device. Did I say that correctly?
Device, yeah.
Device, sorry. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to Travis and our panel, which I am delighted to be joining. So thank you and enjoy. And Travis?
Right. Hey everybody, so we're going to have, I might. Forgot about that. We're going to have a conversation about tobacco usage in all forms of pop culture. And first I'm just going to introduce everybody. So you guys just heard from Robin Koval. She is the CEO and president of the Truth Initiative, which is putting on this Warner series. She is a best-selling author, and she joined Truth in 2013. Where you relaunched the award-winning Truth Youth Tobacco Prevention Campaign and kind of refocused the research and activism programs to spread the truth about tobacco usage. And then next to Robin, we have Kat Wozniak. A sophomore at Holy Cross Academy in New York and an active member of Reality Check, the New York State youth-led adult-supported program aiming to reduce youth exposure to tobacco marketing in stores and on screen. And next to Kat, we have Michael Tynan, a public health analyst with the policy team at the CDC's Office of Smoking and Health. Michael has served on the policy team since 2008. In 2013, he took a short break from the CDC, served as policy director of the State Health Department in Oregon, where he lives, and rejoined the team in 2016. Next to Michael, we have Dr. Jo Cronwell, a BPS chartered psychologist, assistant professor in public health at the University of Bath. She's a member of the Tobacco Control Research Group based at the university, and her core research projects involve exploring behavioral effects of adolescent viewing of images of tobacco and alcohol in the media, both traditional and digitally. She has published her work in national and international journals, as presented her research findings at international conferences. Next to Dr.
I'm not worthy. I'm not worthy.
Next to Dr. Joe, we have Michael Uden, a television industry maverick who began his career as a page at NBC, much like Kenneth from 30 Rock, and has been in the business for over 25 years since then, working both on the corporate side and as the head of his own production company, which he launched in 2000. It's called Michael Uden's My Entertainment. It began with branded entertainment and grew to produce original series for networks, a lot of networks: Discovery, Comedy Central, Nat Geographic, MTV, Food Network, CMT. Good Lord, sir. And next to Michael, finally, we have Stephen Asarge. I did it. A Newsweek reporter who focuses on gaming. You graduated from Roch College with a BA in journalism, and you've worked for iDigital Times, Player.one, IB Times, International Business Times, and you've covered games like League of Legends, Hearthstone, Overwatch. I'm very curious in particular to hear about smoking in video games. That is not my area of expertise, and that sounds, who knew? Before we begin, I want to say this to everyone who is not in the room. Anyone who's watching online can submit questions. We're going to have a little Q&A period afterwards with the audience. So if you're watching online, you can submit questions throughout the event. Post them to the Truth Initiative's Twitter or Facebook account. Use the hashtag Warner Series. So hashtag Warner Series. Please include your name and affiliation along with your question, and we can answer those when we open up to the audience. So if everyone's ready, shall we begin? All right. Well, a little bit about myself. As Robin said, I'm a pop culture reporter of the Washington Post, and I have written a little bit about some of Truth's findings about tobacco use in pop culture. It seems to be particularly insidious in streaming services and things like that. But I am curious to see why our panelists think we're seeing this kind of potential re-emerging of tobacco use in pop culture. And I'd love for everyone to kind of give their thoughts just for about a minute, if you'd like to start, Robin.
Well, sure. I think, there are a lot of things going on. I think one of the primary reasons is you have so many new content producers out there who haven't grown up in the, network television world where you just never could show tobacco. And so in these kind of freer environments, under perhaps a lack of information of how smoking imagery affects behavior, and the fact that they can now do it. And so if you want to show a character who's like Joyce in Stranger Things, like she's under a lot of stress, crazy things are happening, so she smokes. And that, to me is sort of a normal kind of knee-jerk creative reaction if you want to communicate something about a character. And so I think it's kind of, I don't want to say lazy, but easy. And so it happens.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's certainly a visual representation, like you said, that can just kind of take a place of a plot line or having to really emote something. What do you think, Kat?
I think that there's so many more media, so much more media now than there was before. Like, for example, my parents, they had movies and some TV shows. Now I can have so many different types of social media. I have movies, I have Netflix. Netflix in particular it's so much harder to monitor what goes on to there, especially with all of the TV shows. There's different ways that parents can try to censor what their kids can watch, but some parents don't do that, or they don't understand how to do that. And so the kids can pretty much watch whatever they want for as long as they want. And with social media, it's pretty much the same thing. You could lie about your age, you can post whatever you want, and kids can see anything pretty much on social media or on these TV platforms.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think, in the past year we had more than 400 scripted television shows, and a lot of these are not rated in the same manner that they used to be rated because they're going on these streaming services. That's a good point. What do you think, Michael?
Well, it's the 20th anniversary this year of the Master Settlement Agreement. And what that means is that we've really shut down all the avenues where tobacco companies can advertise, right? And at the point of sale is a tightly structured marketing machine for them. But beyond that, you haven't been able to advertise on television since the 1970s. And so it's just natural that if the tobacco companies, Robin used the word replacement smokers earlier, if they're looking for replacement smokers, one of the ways that they do that is to portray smoking as cool. It's to their benefit for smoking to look cool. They did it through the 1940s, through the 1980s by putting tobacco imagery in films in ways that made it portrayed as a common thing, as a natural part of society that cool people do. And so it's just natural that with all the other channels getting shut down for them to market, that this is just one of the last sort of bastions for them to reach consumers, to reach those replacement smokers.
I remember when I was reporting a piece about this, I found that I might have the numbers wrong, but Sly Stallone got something like $500,000 to smoke in several of his movies, including Rocky, including Rambo. Rambo, I guess, makes a little bit more sense to the character, but Rocky, I mean,
right,
boxer, right?
Right, and one of the most famous examples we have is in one of the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, where Superman and General Zod are having a fight, and Superman and General Zod fight into a Marlboro truck. There is no such thing as a Marlboro truck. It does not exist. It was invented for that movie.
No. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Joe, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that I would disagree a little bit with Robin in that positioning this as a re-emergence of tobacco, because I think it just never really went away, and the research that certainly I'm doing in the UK, tobacco and smoking is as prevalent as ever in film and TV, and I think that what has changed, and I think this kind of as to what Kat was saying, is that the media landscape has completely changed, and it's very difficult for us as researchers or policymakers or regulators to keep up with that. So whereas it used to be traditionally, film, watched, through our TV box at home or TV or going to the cinemas, we're now, the way that especially young people are consuming media and the channels through which media is being delivered, it's changing vastly and it's rapidly evolving. So we've got subscription services, we've got streamed media, we've got the internet, we've got gaming, we've got YouTube, we've got social media, so it kind of goes on. And I think that perhaps where we're at the moment is that the policy and the regulation is probably not adequate enough to kind of deal with. I was saying earlier in our previous discussion, it's a little bit like herding cats, trying to create policies and monitor these policies for and evaluate them for their effectiveness. So I think that perhaps that some of the policies might need to be updated. For example, the Article 13 of the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. We're making recommendations at the moment that perhaps an addendum needs to be created that specifically focuses on this kind of new type of media landscape that's evolving very rapidly.
I think one thing you said that really struck me was that as a researcher, it's really hard to keep up with this. I mean, as a pop culture reporter, it's very hard to keep up with this. There are so many movies and shows. I still haven't seen Infinity Wars. I'm sure I'm like the only one in the room.
You are.
That's got to be just a tremendous burden, and trying to kind of keep up with this. Michael, what do you think from a creative perspective?
Well, I definitely agree. It's the media landscape, the number of outlets, the consume content has grown dramatically. I think the other part of that is that regulations are different for different media. I think that's a very important part that has to be looked at. But all of that talks to pushing the creative, I think. What is going to, tell a story that about a very prevalent producer many years ago, Aaron Spelling. Looking at the audience, you would all know his daughter Tori, but he was probably the most prevalent producer in the '80s and did. Mod Squad and Charlie's Angels and Dynasty and all these shows, and he was lived in the biggest home in Beverly Hills and a multi-billionaire and a great guy and a great producer. And the Wall Street Journal once did a front page article on him, and they said, "Look, Mr. Spelling, you do all this stuff. Wouldn't you like to do something, really positive? Be on PBS, do something?" He says, "Yeah, I would, but a guy's got to eat." So it sort of pushes. That's a long way of getting around to, as there's more content, as there's a different medium, as there's less regulation in certain areas, the creative folks, the writers, the directors, and so forth, want to push the envelope.
Yeah.
And I think that comes into play.
And it's still seen as pushing the envelope to some degree to portray this?
To some degree, I believe that where it makes sense, if you do Orange is the New Black, you're in a women's prison. I mean, it would be silly not to be seeing people smoke there.
Right.
Why you see people smoke on Fuller House is another question to me.
That one is what really struck.
I went back and looked at old Fuller House. Nobody smoked in Fuller House.
Yeah,
so there,
I remember Uncle Joey lighting up. I mean,
what I find amazing, like a show like Westworld, right? I mean, in some future that is so advanced that we have robots that look like people and act like people and rebel. That when they want to show one of the scientists or whatever the character is being contemplative or under stress in this future advanced world, they still resort to showing her smoking.
Well, it gives the writers an avenue to pursue that they aren't able to in other media. So.
Makes sense. Well, let's hear a little bit about in video games. How do you think this is? First, has this always been in video games? Has smoking?
Yeah.
Think about Mario.
Well, Nintendo will never put a cigarette in their video game. That's against the rules. But a lot of gaming companies have used cigarettes as a way to show if their character is gritty or badass or needs, some, form of avenue that they're really going through something. There are video game series like Metal Gear Solid where you can smoke a cigarette and it'll make your aim better, but it will also decrease your life at the same time. Yeah, no, they've really thought of this stuff.
Wow.
And in general, it's the same thing with other forms of media. It's a way to show that a character is gritty. There's cowboys. Cowboys are always known. There's McCree in Overwatch, who's always seen smoking a cigar. Graves in League of Legends is a character that had a cigar, but had to get the scar was removed. And the community complained so much that Graves needs to have his cigar that eventually Riot Games caved and gave it back to him.
Becomes a character affectation.
Yeah. It's a way to describe it for what it is.
Are these games, Xbox, computer, phones?
Everything. It's constantly evolving. Metal Gear has been a series across everything. But as you see with a lot of the online games that are coming out more recently, cigarettes are starting to become less prevalent because in foreign markets, having a cigarette in your game or smoking can give it a different rating and may not be allowed to be as shown off or seen by as many people if they're smoking a cigarette.
We discussed earlier that the MPAA kind of now looks at smoking a little bit more. People are still pushing for stricter ratings. Does the video game rating industry, does smoking come into it at all?
I think so. I think the ESRB and PEGI do take that into account when checking for this stuff. But as I said, it's not really something that gamers really focus on too much.
Right.
It's just something that's there.
Right.
I mean, I will say that one of the things that we found is that the percentage of games that have smoking that are rated T for teen versus those that actually carry the warning, there's a big difference. And in speaking to the ESRB, their position was, well, there's so many things to put on these games, we can't put everything on there. It's still a challenge.
Yeah. I find alcohol is probably more focused on for the ESRB. League of Legends is a game that has, giant monsters from darkness eating small, cute little kitty cats. But the reason it has a T rating is because there's a character called Gragas that drinks.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But Mario remains a non-smoker.
Mario will be an E till the end of time.
So I think that's an interesting point on the policy. So you say Nintendo has a policy, they have a company policy, they're going to follow it. The movie studios have policies about not putting smoking into movies, and they're not following them. And we also know that the Motion Picture Association has a descriptor that they can put on their ratings. They can tell you whether or not smoking appears in youth-rated films. And there was John Polanski looked at this in 2015, and he found that 89% of the youth-rated films that had smoking in them did not have the smoking indicator in the MPAA box.
Wow.
So the policies, it sounds like the video game companies are adhering to the policies. That's not necessarily the case for movie studios.
May I add to that comment as well? So it's the same kind of in India. So the CCBFC, it's a broadcasting regulator in India, like the BBFC. So in India, by law, the movie producers are required to show health warnings and health spots either during or before a movie with smoking in. So they tend to need to be kind of a particular size or a particular colour, and they need to be present on screen for a certain length of time. And in the research that we're conducting out in India at the moment, what we've noticed is that those regulations are being completely violated. So in some instances, the health warnings are not on the films at all, and in other cases, they're teeny tiny little warnings that you can't read that are in the corner of the screen. But then monitoring it and having a mechanism where one can report these kind of violations, I think it is fairly important. And another thing, just going back to the PEGI system, some of the research that we conducted a couple of years ago, and I don't know whether this has changed, but they generally have content descriptors, which, so for example, if there's kind of sex or violence in a video, they will say, and then they'll kind of age rate appropriately. But there are no content descriptors for smoking at all. There aren't any, unless that's changed very recently. That there are none.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I think one thing that is clear is that whether it's a re-emergence or it's always been there, smoking and tobacco usage remains prevalent in our pop culture. So I have a question for Robin, and then I'd like to open up to anyone else who would like to chime in. Smoking rates are decreasing. Not to put too blunt a point on it, but why does it matter?
So, we love to tell the big story of how dramatically smoking rates are declining, and it's a huge success that so many people have contributed to. But that sort of obfuscates the story that that's not happening every place. So, among populations that are better educated, have higher incomes, have better access to health care, all those things, smoking rates are dramatically down. But there's a part of the U.S., we call it Tobacco Nation, that, it's basically the Midwest and the South, where tobacco rates are not declining as rapidly and remains highly prevalent. And, those are places where we really worry whether the pervasiveness of smoking imagery and content is slowing down, among many other things, the progress we could be making. And so, I think it's a little bit of an overgeneralization to say, well, smoking rates are going down, so what are we worried about?
I could say something about that as well. The e-cigarette use rates are higher than they've ever been before as well. They're at 50%, and there have been many studies showing that there's a correlation between e-cigarette use that leads into tobacco use. And so it sometimes takes time, but there is a connection between the tobacco in movies, and not always directly going to using cigarettes or cigars, but sometimes people go to e-cigarettes or other nicotine products, and then that leads into cigarette use. And so that's a problem as well. Even though it doesn't seem like it, it's indirect.
So,
Mike,
smoking rates are going down, but they're not zero. Right. And so I think that's where, to build on Robin's points from when she introduced, we know that there is a dose-response relationship. The more youth see on-screen smoking, the more likely they are to start smoking.
And can you talk a little bit about the CDC's research into this? I know I came across the Surgeon General's report saying this exists.
So the 2012 Surgeon General's report focused on tobacco use and issues related to young people. And one of the conclusions in that report was that there was a causal relationship. And that's a really important thing. When the Surgeon General says something, a disease that's caused by tobacco use, there's a large body of evidence and a large bar that has to be achieved. There has to be a large amount of studies, and there have to be many published reports before we can make that causal conclusion. The Surgeon General concluded that there is a causal relationship between youth exposure to smoking imagery in film and youth initiation.
Oh, wow.
And one of the things that one of the studies the Surgeon General cites in the 50th anniversary, the report that came out in 2014, was that if smoking imagery was removed from movies, you would see about an 18% decline in youth smoking.
18%?
Yeah.
That sounds
Really?
massive.
That sounds pretty high.
And, oh, sorry, were you
No,
going
no.
to?
Go ahead.
Oh, no. And I was just going to add to that. I mean, certainly in the UK, over 200,000 kids start smoking each year, and over a third of them will go, actually 2/3 of them will go on to be smokers into adulthood. And a recent report that it was conducted by ASH, so that's Action on Smoking and Health in the UK, they're in collaboration with UK CETAS, they developed a report that they put forward to a select committee in the UK very recently. And within that report, that they'd presented some results which they'd gleaned from the ASH smoking survey. And what they found was that for film, that for those kids at age 11 to 17, over 80% of them had remembered seeing smoking in films, and for TV it was around about 61%. So I think that, you know, I mean, those figures are very, very high, and I think that it just kind of undermines all the gains that we are making through, you know, other forms of, you know, policy, you know, through, like, for example, tax, or for example in the UK, the new plain packaging rules, which I'll talk a little bit about later on, hopefully. So yeah, it's still a problem. You know, that kids are still being exposed. Therefore, I mean, and we do know that exposure to smoking in media is an independent risk factor for the uptake of smoking.
Right.
So that's controlling for peer smoking and family smoking as well.
Michael?
Yeah, we've. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I'm be interested in knowing, to Robin's point and what you're saying, you know, a lot more when you talk about where we see smoking on television. It is on the Netflixes and the streaming services and the pay services and and to your point, it seems that the people that are watching and have those services are not increasing their smoking as much as possibly the socioeconomic folks that are not watching it and don't have access to that. I'm just curious, you know, if there's been any research done in that regard. To, you know, people who watch Orange is the New Black as opposed to people who don't.
Well, I mean, certainly, you know, these streaming services, because
I understand
you
it's
pay
exposed
for
to
them,
everybody in YouTube and so
but
forth.
you know, what we find in our research is there's smoking prevalent on basic cable shows, and even, you know, we've seen it on network television. It was the premiere episode of Saturday Night Live, which is a pretty popular show on regular network television. This was this past season, had, you know, smoking in it. So,
And that pulls about 25 million viewers.
right, and then all of the replays of that everybody watches on YouTube the next day to see, you know, what happened in the cold open.
Right.
That's one thing that strikes me too, is all of this content. It's not like someone sees it and then it goes away. It builds up over time. It all is on the streaming services, or if you're watching basic cable, reruns, things like that. But before we move on, Michael Tynan, I believe you had something.
Yeah, I think to build on Joan's point, you know, we do have some data on how much smoking currently continues to appear in film. And so it's sort of like a lot of the work I do, sort of a good news, bad news thing, where the overall number of movies, the percentage of movies that have smoking in them have declined. So we saw a decline for youth-rated movies from about 31% to about a quarter. So around 26% of all youth-rated movies have smoking in them. For PG-13, it's about a third, though, about 30, just above a third, 35% of movies.
Can we just say that again?
Yeah.
26%
of youth-rated films.
So we're saying G and PG rated films.
G, PG, and PG-13.
PG, okay.
And then if we just carve out the PG-13, it's 35%. And so that is so we're seeing the numbers go down, but that's still alarming that 35% of youth-rated films, of PG-13 films, have smoking in them. And even though the number have gone down, the number of incidents have increased. And so while it may only now be 35% of PG-13 movies, what we've seen, though, is that for those PG-13 movies, there's been a 43% spike in the number of tobacco incidents. So if a movie has a tobacco incident in it, there's going to be more smoking in that movie.
And let me ask you this, not to put you on the spot, but how many Americans smoke? Do we have a percentage of what percentage of the population?
Right, and it varies widely across the country, right? So you've got some states like California and Utah, which have very low smoking rates, under 10%, and then you've got states like Kentucky and West Virginia, which have close to a quarter. So it varies widely across the country, and that's why the Truth Initiative, they've done a lot of work looking at Tobacco Nation, right? Where we have, not only do we have the highest smoking rates among states, but we have some of the highest tobacco-related death and disease among states.
What really strikes me is that the highest number you just said is about a quarter, and yet in films, 36% of PG-13 rated movies have smoking. So
Right.
it doesn't seem to accurately reflect America either.
So yeah, so it kind of over predicts or how children might. So what I'm trying to say is children may over perceive the numbers of people who are actually smoking in real life.
Everyone's doing
And also, not all kids, watch films that are within their age rating, or play video games, for example, which are within their own age rating. So often kids, especially when you kind of get to 14, 15, there's so many kids that are watching A-rated, 18-rated, adult-rated movies and playing adult-rated video games as well. So that's not even taking into considering,
that they might be exposed to this.
That, yeah. So,
Otherwise, it struck me about video games. I presume that your average teenager who's playing a video game is not necessarily beholden to its rating. I know when I was a teenager, that was not something my parents even thought to look at.
Well, it's gotten a bit better in recent years after the whole Grand Theft Auto debacle, where parents were realizing their kids were shooting each other in the face.
Yeah.
They decided that it was time for the ASRB to actually matter. But as games start to become more prevalent in kids' lives, it starts to be less about the actual video game and more about the community surrounding the video game.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the rise of YouTubers and Twitch streamers who basically...
Can you explain Twitch for...
Okay, yeah. Twitch is a live streaming platform, he knows, where you watch someone else play video games.
And this is a very popular
Yes,
service.
because when you describe it like that, it sounds completely ridiculous. Why would you watch someone else play video games? But it's not about that. It's about a community. You are starting to bond with this streamer. You watch him every day after school. You know what he likes. You hang out with him. He's a person to you. But these Twitch streamers, they are not allowed to smoke or even drink alcohol on stream, or else Twitch will ban them. So in a way, if your favorite streamer doesn't smoke, you're not seeing it as much. And in the popular games that these streamers play, like Fortnite, Overwatch, other than McCree, but Fortnite, League of Legends, these games, there's no real there's no e-cigarettes. There's nothing about that in those games at all, and there's very few actual cigarettes in them. It's sort of like it's falling less in the community. It's of course I'd say it's probably increasing in the M-rated games, like your Wolfenstein New Colossus.
Stands for mature.
Yeah, M for
17 and
mature,
older.
where you shoot Nazis in the face. There's also
There's a lot of shooting in the face in these games.
There's a lot. Well, that's because that's the best place to get killed.
The one thing I just wanted to say about what makes games a little bit different than, for instance, movie or television show, those are pretty easily accessible to adults. So if you wanted to monitor what your kid was watching, you'd have a way of knowing it. How effective you'd be, of course, is another issue.
Yeah.
The challenge with games is very, very few adults actually play these games, sit next to their kids while they're engaging with the games, and these games are long and complicated and have many different story arcs, so it's very hard for a parent to know what's actually in the games.
On that point, parents need to start watching their kids engage with their gaming more, because you don't know what's happening. Because I'd say most of the problem is with the communication you're having with strangers online. When I was a kid and AOL Instant Messenger was around, I wasn't supposed to be talking with random strangers online. Like, that's the thing. But in these games, it encourages that behavior. You're supposed to be talking with, not going to say whatever their username is, but it's just normalized. Yeah.
I can say from a youth perspective too, like I have a lot of friends, I don't do much gaming, but I have a lot of friends that are gamers, and they have like really strict parents, but they play whatever games they want because their parents, they don't like check every single game. They check the rating, okay, this rating seems okay. But I mean, if it ends up having a couple cigarettes in it, they don't realize, they're not watching their kid play their games, they're not going to end up knowing. So they have no idea in the end, and the kid sees it.
And Robin, I'd like you to speak to this. I'm sure that there is it's almost more problematic in some ways in gaming when you are controlling the character. You are the character, right? So if your character is smoking by proxy in a way, if you think that is a fun thing, it's almost like you are, if that...
Right, so, I mean, we obviously have, this all started with a focus on the movies, but if you think about the movies, that's kind of a lean back, it's passive. There's a real separation between you as the audience, the viewer, and what's happening up on the screen, especially if you think of a theater viewing, so you're in the dark, all that sort of thing. But when you think about gaming, it's very immersive. It is a first-person, many times, experience. So you are the character. So I think it's easy for that line to be crossed. And I would say even in streaming, you used to have to watch a television show in the way that it was metered out to you.
Right.
So maybe you could watch one episode a week, and then you'd be allowed to watch another episode another week.
5 hours
right.
at one
now,
time.
you can lock yourself in your room and watch 13 episodes in a row. So that experience becomes very intense.
That makes sense. Well, it sounds like we all agree that this is something that tobacco usage is still heavily in our pop culture. Let's talk a little bit about steps that are being taken to combat this. Kat, I'd like to start with you. If you could tell me sort of what your young people doing in an attempt to combat this, or is anything happening?
Well, I know in New York, where I'm from, one thing that we do is smoke-free movie nights, and that's a really fun thing that we do with our community. What we do is we go out to our local schools and we just play a movie with no tobacco in it, and we play it for the younger kids, and it's completely free. We encourage the parents and the kids to come, and ahead of time we talk to the parents about what the tobacco does to influence their children, and how the imagery can really get in their kids' heads. And we just try to educate the community through these events. And we have parents and kids sign letters, and we often send letters to schools or to our local and state legislators. We have them sign letters to the MPAA to have them get an R rating as well for the tobacco imagery in movies.
Well, let me ask this, and Robin, I'm going to direct this to you, but anyone can chime in after. It seems like there is also a pervasiveness when it comes to celebrities that are surrounding these things. I remember at the 2017 Met Gala, there were some images of celebrities smoking cigarettes in bathrooms that went viral. That's not even legal in New York City. How does this affect young people, and what steps are being taken to kind of combat that? I know recently a picture of Ben Affleck in his car with an e-cigarette was one of the most popular images online.
So we call these unpaid spokespersons, which is really incredibly beneficial to the tobacco industry. Why spend your own money to advertise when you can get celebrities and all sorts of folks to do it for you? And we've called that out a lot. And we try to, we're talking to young people, so we try to have fun with it. So, for instance, you brought up the Met Gala last year when, those pictures went viral of all those celebrities hanging out in the bathroom smoking. We took those pictures and we made a fun video with it. And what we did is we replaced all the cigarettes with pictures of them slurping up spaghetti and putting tubas in their mouths and stuff like that, just to kind of call attention to the fact that this is going on, and whether you're a famous person or you're just a regular person, when you post a picture of yourself smoking, you're doing the work of the tobacco industry, and you're doing that as an unpaid spokesperson for them. And think about that.
Well, let me ask kind of a follow-up there. Kat mentioned this earlier. Social media seems like it could easily be a place where, that's why these photographs go viral. has that created more issues in terms of tobacco use among young people?
Well, I mean, we try to, you see it every place, and that I think is part of, like, look at, for instance, we've been talking, I don't mean to get off topic here, but there's been so much written about the jewel craze that's going on in the United States now, and so much youth usage of this product. So
And that is an e-cigarette, correct?
it's an e-cigarette. For those of you who don't know, it looks like a USB device, easy to hide, very cool, techie looking.
Very popular among high school kids.
Very popular among high school kids. And one of the things that we find so interesting and disturbing is, so if you go to the Juul Instagram page, all the people look overage. They're kind of cool and everything. They're obviously not old people who've been smoking for 20 years who need to quit. That's a whole other topic. But as there's one official Juul Instagram page, and then there are dozens and dozens of fan pages that are all, full of content posted by young people, doing cool things that, young people like to do, and that's the real advertising.
That imagery, not to remain off topic, but that imagery did really shock me. I recently read about this, I looked into it, and the pictures are not what I think people would associate with smoking back in the day. It's bodybuilders, it's people wearing risque clothing, it is not seen, it's almost seen as part of a healthy lifestyle rather than a not healthy lifestyle.
Because there's great misperceptions. So if you ask 2/3 of the young people we surveyed who use Juul doesn't know it has nicotine in it. They think it's just flavors. Oh, it's like mango. So yeah, I could see that. You could at the same time be very health conscious and think that, Juul is, just like a roll of Lifesavers, which it is not.
Well, Michael Uden, I want to ask you, we're talking about ways that steps people are taking to try to combat this. Do you think that the entertainment industry has a responsibility? And is the entertainment industry, I realize that's a very vague and overarching kind of word, the entertainment industry, but are there steps being taken within it to combat this? Is this something that's talked about?
Well, when you start with an idea, you start with an idea, and then it's just to get into quickly into the process. You start with an idea, and then you do a one-page treatment on it, and you get that idea, and then it goes to further, and then it goes to a script, and then it keeps going up the ladders at the executives at the various outlets, whether it be the networks or Netflix or so forth and so on. So it's not like you're starting out with something where you're saying, this guy's going to smoke in this scene. So I'm very protective of the creative, want to be protective of the creative process. I think that's very, very important. And in today's world where you have more reality television and kids are smarter than they've ever been and have access to things that they've ever been, more things than they've ever had. So I sort of put it on, yes, we do need to do more. Not necessarily within the body of the show. If it's gratuitous and get rid of it. If it's there for no reason, get rid of it. But if it's relevant, if it's natural, if it's normal, and you would miss it, if it wasn't there, that's okay. I want to keep that integrity, but I do want to see. Saturday Night Live should not be smoking. It's illegal on broadcast television.
In your experience, though, is that conversation happening at any point in the creative process? Is someone sitting down and saying, wait, we have this character smoking, maybe this isn't a great thing to have in here? Or is that sort of not,
only if it's not really relevant, to be very honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't think that's something that is talked about.
So who decides then? Who makes that decision, that creative decision, to say, because actually going out and buying some cigarettes and putting them in the hand of a character to smoke, somebody's making a decision about that character.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately the decision makers are the people who are paying for the product. So,
but there is a solution here, and I think it's from what you talked about earlier, Stephen, where you talked about how there are video game companies that want that E rating.
Yep.
So they won't put smoking in their video games. There's a solution also for the movie industry, and it's been proposed by public health groups, including the World Health Organization, to make it so that any film that has smoking in it would be rated R. And so then it could be if a if a producer or a director wants their movie to be rated PG-13,
Right.
that's appropriate for youth, then they can make that decision. They still have the creative control, whether or not to put the tobacco product in it,
Right.
and it could just be the same approach.
I totally agree with you, but as we've been talking here, it's very difficult to control what kids are watching.
Right.
But I think similarly, if
But there is a major responsibility on the part of the industry to get involved in this. We all know smoking's bad. We all know it's the worst thing it can be for kids especially and adults. And we all have a responsibility, but I don't think it's necessarily with what's on the screen. I think it's the way to deal with it.
Well, we only have
in the way you're talking, Michael.
We only have a couple minutes left before we open it up to questions from the audience. So I'm going to throw this out to anyone who would like to answer. Kind of the final question I'd like to ask is how, obviously this is something that, like you said, you think the entertainment industry has a responsibility. You're speaking to young people and adults about what this can do. How can we improve communication around what tobacco usage in pop culture can do?
Well, I'd say from our perspective, I don't think, prohibition or more and more regulation is, the only answer. Yes, we want the R rating on films, but I think also there's an opportunity, we believe this, it's always been the way the Truth campaign works. It's about, young people talking to young people. So, for instance, in video games, we want to work within the community and with the community. I mean, that is a very player-driven, community-driven culture. So, how do we start that conversation? I think similarly with creators, with writers, with showrunners, even with actors. How do we want to raise awareness and work with individuals to say it's not about prohibiting you from doing something, it's about helping you to understand that what you do actually matters out there.
I just want to speak on the video game industry in general, is gamers understand when they're being condescended to. If you want to try and go directly to the source in combat gaming, you have to be genuine about it. We understand because for years gamers have always been the nerds in the room, the ostracized group that are deemed as odd. You have to make sure that what you're doing is from a solid place. Like we've seen it recently with the video game violence conversation coming back up for absolutely no reason, even though there's no science to back up the claim. It's people who don't understand the space and just see the gore and assume it has to be affecting young people. It was a whole big deal in the gaming sphere because we don't like being disrespected. And that's my take on it, is you have to be genuine about it and you have to find a way to do it without coming off as clueless.
And I'm sure that's regardless of industry. Michael?
Yeah, I think from the movie perspective, because that's where the work that I've done has been, so I'll focus on that. I've worked a lot with Stan Glantz at the University of California, San Francisco, and Jana Polanski, and I think back to something that Tom Frieden, the former CDC director, said, which is what gets measured gets changed, right? And so that's sort of the concept. We have to continue to measure and track and understand how much smoking imagery is appearing in movies. There was a great downward trend that occurred from 2005 to 2010 that we reported on. Had that trend continued, there would be no smoking in youth-rated films today. But the trend has not continued and it's flattened. So what gets measured gets changed. We need to continue measuring it, and we need to figure out how to expand the really good work we've done in movies to other forms of media. So Truth has started to look at video games, they've started to look at online streaming. That's great, we need more work in that space. And then the other sort of piece is we as a public health community need to talk about the causal relationship between youth exposure to tobacco imagery in films and youth initiation better, and we need to talk about it more. People believe us when we say that there's a causal relationship, that smoking causes cancer, smoking causes heart disease. It's the same sort of standard that we had to meet those disease burden causal relationships. We've done the same thing with youth initiation and smoking imagery in film. So we as a public health community need to talk about that more and explain that to people.
I think that
No, you can.
I think that something that we need to focus on to really make a change is not only the movies and television, but also the social media, particularly, because that's something that I think kind of gets passed by. Because for example, when I asked some of my friends kind of to prepare for this, what they thought about smoking in movies, the first response I got was, well, this celebrity looks really hot when they're smoking. And they just went on Instagram and pulled up a picture of them smoking, and it took all of 30 seconds. And I think that when these celebrities post, it really gets that image in people's heads. You know, the movies do it, the TV does it, but when they post and you see that post and you like that post,
Shows
I
up
think
on your
that
phone, it's in
really,
your pocket.
Yeah, I think that really does it too.
Doctor?
Yeah, I was just going to add what Michael was saying about the monitoring. I've spent the most of the past 5 years simply monitoring and tracking how much tobacco there is in various media. And I know that some of our colleagues over in the States have done the same. And I think we need to, we can't continue just monitoring and then moaning about the amount of tobacco that we keep seeing. We need to ask ourselves the question, so what? What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it from a policy and a legislation perspective? But also, I think from a research perspective, I particularly would welcome more funding coming to the research community so that we can do some of the, providing the evidence, the strong evidence, the science base that we need, but also just to do some of the softer research as well. The research that might mean speaking to movie producers about what really kind of motivates them to decide whether a character smokes or not. What's the process and the thought process and the practical processes that they will go through. And that's the same for all the creative industries. We need to just understand more about where they're coming from and just engage with them on that level.
Well, I think now, unless anyone else has any kind of parting remarks, we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. I want to remind everyone at home, let me get my piece of paper here, if you want to submit questions online, please do it on Twitter or on Facebook to the Truth Initiative's page using the hashtag #WarnerSeries. And yeah, any questions?
Thank you. I'm Jim Curry. I'm the Executive Director of the Commissioned Officers Association of the U.S. Public Health Service. We represent the uniformed officers as well as the people like the U.S. Surgeon General. Bringing what you all have said down to our locality here, we took on the Kennedy Center earlier this year. I went to a production of An American in Paris, and I was appalled at all of the smoking that went on stage. And it was gratuitous because these were fictitious characters that didn't need to be smoking. So we wrote to the president of the Kennedy Center and said, why don't you take the lead and ban smoking from your productions? And I'll seize on what Stephen said. I got what I considered the most condescending letter from the president of the Kennedy Center saying, well, those were herbal cigarettes. As if that made one bit of difference in the world. And besides, she said, we believe in creative expression. That has nothing to do with creative expression. There were lots of young people in the room, and they were impressed by all of these really cool characters on stage who were smoking. So I wrote to the chairman of the board of the Kennedy Center. I have yet to hear from him. I've sent him 2 letters now. But we are not going to give up on this, because if movies and television and video games affect young people, then stage productions do too. And one thing we're going to do is fight big tobacco. I have heard, and I can't confirm this, that Altria is a big supporter of the Kennedy Center. I will not draw a cause and effect relationship there, but it is interesting. Thank you.
Question?
Hi, I'm Julian Santiago with the American Lung Association. So my question to you guys is, if we, when we decide to do this stuff, do you think that the tobacco company will try to strike harder? And if they do, have you guys thought about what you guys were going to do to fight stronger than the tobacco company to keep smoking away, well, keep smoking away from video games, movies, and etc.?
It's a great question. We haven't really spoken very much about the tobacco industry's role in all this. Would anyone like to?
I guess I'll start off. Gaming and tobacco in general, the tobacco companies really haven't broken through that space yet, because the companies that control the live streaming communities, your YouTubes and your Twitches, do not like cigarette smoking on their platform. So they've tried to break through, but they've also not been able to advertise in games. So there really hasn't been that much. The game, I'm not sure if the cigarette companies themselves have been throwing more advertising money at games, but I can definitely see it happening in the future if some law breaks and they're allowed to do it.
We know that most of the advertising money that the tobacco companies spend are at the point of sale, and they use that to reduce prices because they know that this is the most effective way for them to increase youth use and adult use is to reduce prices. I think that doesn't mean that they're not doing it. That doesn't mean that they're not influencing. They're not influencing Hollywood, or they're not influencing producers. We don't know. And one of the policy solutions that the World Health Organization and others have proposed, the public health groups, is that in addition to the R rating that we talked about earlier, you could also have movie studios certify that no tobacco payments have been received. And that's not been adopted yet, but certifying that no tobacco payments have been received. Because there's a long history back to the 1930s and 40s in the golden age of television through the old stale musty Superman reference that I used, that most of the youth in the room were born after the movie came out, with tobacco companies actually placing products in films or placing smoking in films. We don't know if that's happening today or if it's just a result of that long-standing relationship they've had over time. And we need to measure that, and we need to look into that.
I think also another way is to ensure that the tobacco industry are disclosing their tobacco advertising, promotion and sponsorship activities. So some kind of regulation, perhaps, that whereby they have to disclose that through their tax returns or their accounts or whatever. So that's that's coming at it from a slightly different angle, but that's one option to think about.
They do have to disclose in the United States. I think one of the things that Michael was referring to before, a lot of the practices that have come to light in the past were ones that they were doing, more surreptitiously. But I think, the real thing that, we worry about is why pay for something you can get for free? And so, what all of this imagery does is it drives people to then go into a store and see the Marlboro or the Newport posters up and everything, and that's what we really worry about.
It reminds me too of what Michael said earlier too about is it incidental use or is it sort of so I think ask yourself when you see a smoking image in a movie, did it need to be there? Did the villain really need to light a pile of money with a cigar, or could they have done that with a match? Did this robot, this transformer robot really need, and this is a real example, really need to have a cigar that they were going to be smoking? Robots don't smoke, I'm pretty sure.
John Goodman robots do.
I'm 100% sure robots don't smoke. I think you could ask yourself, why is that smoking appearing too? And I think that's a question that needs to be posed back at Hollywood eventually.
Another important thing too, I think, is to really talk to the legislators about this, because they can bring awareness, and so that if the tobacco industry tries to strike back, you can just stop it right there. They can't be allowed to if there's more laws. There are now, but some of them aren't quite effective. And if people are educated on how the tobacco industry does this, then what the tobacco industry tries to strike back with can't really be as effective because no one's going to buy it.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Miles Strong, and I'm with the Youth Media Institute. And my question was, your take on the fact that some screenwriters do use certain techniques to tell the negative parts of their characters and stuff. And a lot of that can affect their ratings, and a lot of streaming services alike to Netflix have a lot of parental control options that aren't always used and can affect the influence of teens. Do you feel like that those parental controls not being used is also affecting the influence on teens?
Yeah, I think that's the. Hello? I think that's really, for me, the core issue. I think that we all have responsibility as parents, brothers, sisters, and so forth to, use the controls that we have. A 10-year-old kid is going to think something different, as opposed to what I'm going to think. And with all due respect, what Michael said, I mean, if I'm sitting there watching a movie and I see someone, I see Tony Soprano light up, $100 bills with a cigarette, I'm not saying to myself he should have used a lighter. I'm saying, it's not something that's top of mind with people watching these kinds of things. So I do think the essence of this, and this is what Robin and this organization has done so brilliantly in trying to do, is put these controls out there and put all the options out there. But the likelihood of and this is probably the least PC thing to say, but the likelihood of things, whether it's tobacco, sex, drinking, violence, all these issues, of getting less in visual media is going to be very difficult in today's world. I think we have to control it more.
I think I'll just do parental controls in gaming. No, I don't need one. Every single console and PC has a form of parental controls that you can make sure what games your kids can and can't play. The problem is finding out how to use those parental controls can be extremely complicated. The Xbox's system involves going through 3 different sub-menus just to find out what you need to click on. And also,
Many people that know they're
exactly, yeah, and they know how to cheat the system. My mom, I used to play like 8 hours a day of an MMO back in the day, and she was like, "You can't play anymore." So what I do, I just wait till she went to work, and then I played. Cheat the system. It's so important to understand what your kids are doing to monitor it, because there's so much out there that isn't really controlled by a ratings board or what have you, especially with gaming, because you are the avatar, you are the character in the game. So anything goes in these games, You can get banned, but that could take weeks or months, or you could say whatever you want and not get banned, It's just about getting picked up by a random report system.
Well, I think we have time for just one more question.
We have a couple of questions from online. The first question is, with your re-emergence of tobacco in culture, do you think it's just lazy plots? And excuse me, this is from Smoke Free St. Joe. How might stress be dramatized instead of smoking?
Towel on the forehead?
You're the creator.
I'm not sure. How else can you show stress?
I think it's fair to say not everybody
sweat.
who's stressed smokes on TV. Yeah.
I thought David Edelstein, film critic, was talking about this the other day, and that it is sort of the onus on a director, a writer, or an actor to find another motivation to communicate something, and I think what does happen is, and we all fall into habits and easy stereotypes, and so that is one of the conversations that we want to have with industry, to say, think about it. If you're trying to show a character is a little edgy, or you're trying to show a character is working at a difficult problem, or involved in a challenge, there has to be more than one way to show that. For instance, if you had a character who was a non-smoker, based on however you wrote them, but now they're under stress, you'd find some other way
To do it.
to communicate that.
Right, and it's not
Bite their nails.
and it's not just under stress. A lot of times smoking is used to show pleasure, which I think is a problem as well.
Can I just add to that? Maybe going slightly off topic, but there's just something that I wanted to say, is that including smoking in films is not as straightforward as we think from a production perspective. So, for example, in the UK, there's a ban on smoking in the workplace. The camera crew, the production crew, when they're filming, a lot of the filming is on a set inside. The cigarettes that people are smoking, they're not actually smoking the cigarettes at all. So actually, the smoke and sometimes part of the cigarette is put in afterwards by a visual effects expert. So it's quite time consuming. And it's expensive to do, you know, to actually just, if you think about the process that goes on there. So really, you know, we need to sell them on the positives of, you know, it's going to save a lot of money and a lot of time, you know, not including.
That's a very specific choice to go and do all of that.
Yeah.
I think it's really not as hard of a choice as people make it out to seem. I mean, there's so many other choices. I mean, I'm young. I don't smoke, but I get stressed. I don't immediately go to smoking. There's other things that people do, and I think that the movie companies should really consider other options.
And well, I think that's all the time we have. I think Robin's going to give some closing remarks. Thank you to all the panelists, and thanks for everyone for your questions.
Thank you.
Well, well, I just wanted to thank all of you for being here. Our panelists, especially to thank Travis for guiding us and such a good conversation. I think, you know, for those that, I will wrap it up. For those that are listening, if there is anybody in the entertainment industry, others in the video game space, and people who really can help us make a difference, I would say, you know, I think sometimes what we do can be interpreted as criticism, but I would hope that it can also be taken as an invitation, that we really believe that the way to solve these problems is to join with the people who are on the ground, who actually have the power, much more power, frankly, than we do to make change. So I invite you to engage with us, and I invite everybody here to have lunch, to use it as an opportunity, chat with any of the panelists, network a little bit, continue the conversation, and thank you so much for being here today. It's a great job. Thank you so much.
Okay.